Gideon never saw himself as a warrior. He was just a man trying to survive, hiding in the shadows, threshing wheat in secret so the enemy wouldn't steal it. He lived in a time of terror, when the Midianites raided Israel year after year, leaving destruction in their wake. His people were starving, their land was barren, and their hope was gone. But in the middle of this despair, an angel of the Lord appeared. Not to a mighty soldier, not to a powerful leader, but to a frightened man in hiding. And the first words spoken, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." Mighty warrior. Gideon must have looked around in confusion. Who? Me? How could he be a warrior when he was too afraid to fight? How could he be chosen when he was the least in his family, from the weakest tribe? And yet God does not see as we see. He does not call us by what we are. He calls us by what we are destined to become. Have you ever felt too weak, too small, too unqualified to do something great? What if the very thing you fear the most is the place where God wants to prove his power in you? What if, like Gideon, your hiding place is actually your training ground? Israel was drowning in fear. The Midianites swept through the land like a plague, devouring crops, slaughtering livestock, leaving behind nothing but ruin. For 7 long years, the people of Israel cowered in caves, watching helplessly as their enemies destroyed everything they had worked for. They had abandoned God, turned to false idols, and now their sin had led them into the hands of their oppressors. But when their suffering became unbearable, when their cries of despair echoed through the mountains, they finally called out to the God they had forgotten, and God heard them. Have you ever felt like you were stuck in a cycle of defeat, wondering if God was still listening? In the midst of this chaos, in a hidden place where the enemy could not see, a man named Gideon was threshing wheat. Not in an open field, as was custom, but in a winepress, small, enclosed, out of sight. He wasn't preparing for war. He wasn't rallying an army. He was just trying to survive. But then, out of nowhere, an angel appeared. "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." Mighty warrior? Gideon looked around. Was God talking to him? He was no warrior. He was no leader. He was the least in his family, from the weakest clan. He was hiding, not fighting. And yet, God was calling him to something greater. Have you ever felt like God saw something in you that you couldn't see in yourself? But Gideon did not leap into action. He had questions. He had doubts. If the Lord is with us, why has all this happened? His words were raw, honest. He did not understand why God had allowed their suffering. He saw no evidence of miracles, no sign that God was still fighting for them. And then he looked at himself, small, weak, insignificant. How can I save Israel? But God was not looking at Gideon's ability. He was looking at his own power working through him. "I will be with you," God said, "and you will strike down the Midianites as one man." Have you ever doubted yourself so much that you forgot what God is capable of? But still, Gideon hesitated. He needed proof. He needed to be sure. So he laid out a fleece, asking for it to be wet with dew, while the ground remained dry. God did it, but still Gideon doubted. So he asked again, this time for the fleece to be dry while the ground was wet. And again, God answered. But at some point, faith had to take over. Have you ever asked for so many signs that you delayed stepping into what God had already confirmed? Finally, Gideon obeyed. He gathered an army of 32,000 men ready to fight the Midianites, but God had other plans. "Too many," he said. "If you win with this army, you will think you did it on your own." So God told Gideon to send home anyone who was afraid. 22,000 left. Only 10,000 remained. But God still wasn't finished. "Still too many," he said. So he tested them, reducing the army again. And when it was over, only 300 men remained, from 32,000 to 300, against an army as vast as the sand on the seashore. Impossible, but that's exactly how God wanted it. Have you ever felt like you didn't have enough, only to realize that God works best when the odds are against you? And then came the battle, but there were no swords, no shields, no chariots. Instead, Gideon's men carried trumpets, torches, and clay jars. In the dead of night, they surrounded the Midianite camp. At Gideon's signal, they blew their trumpets, shattered their jars, and lifted their torches high. Chaos erupted. The Midianites, waking in terror, turned on each other, slaughtering their own men. By the time the battle was over, Israel had won, not by their own strength, but by God's power. Have you ever seen God fight a battle for you in a way you never expected? Victory was theirs. Israel was free, but Gideon's story did not end there. The people begged him to become their king, but he refused. "The Lord will rule over you," he said, and yet, in his success, he made a dangerous mistake. He collected gold from the people and fashioned an ephod, a sacred object that soon became an idol. The same man who had trusted God in battle led the people into spiritual compromise. Victory is dangerous when we forget who gave it to us. Have you ever had a moment where success pulled you away from God instead of closer to Him? Gideon's story is one of weakness turned to strength, fear turned to faith, and impossibility turned into victory. But it is also a warning, because even the mightiest warriors can fall when they forget the one who made them strong. Have you ever had a moment when God called you to something far greater than yourself? What if the very thing you fear the most is the place where God wants to prove His power in you? What if, like Gideon, your hiding place is actually your training ground? Gideon's story is not just about victory, it's about transformation. He started as a man ruled by fear, hiding from his enemies, doubting himself and questioning God. But God didn't call him by his fear. He called him by his destiny. "Mighty warrior," God declared while Gideon was still trembling. And even in his doubts, even in his weakness, God was patient. He led him step by step, proving that true strength does not come from numbers, power, or skill, but from trusting in the one who never fails. Gideon didn't need an army of thousands. He needed obedience. And through that obedience, he led Israel to one of the greatest victories in history. Have you ever felt too small, too weak, or too broken to be used by God? What if Gideon's story is proof that God doesn't look for the qualified? He qualifies those He calls. What if your greatest weakness is the very thing God wants to use to display His power? What if the battle you're afraid of is actually the battle God wants to fight for you? Tell me, what part of Gideon's journey spoke to you the most? Have you ever seen God work through your weakness instead of your strength? If this story inspired you, then don't miss our next video. Solomon, the man who asked for wisdom but lost his way. Watch it next.